Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I hope that the announcement of the GoToWebinar lady has stopped for everybody. That's always a little bit surprising. But if not, I think by now I have talked enough so that she stopped. So welcome to the webinar. The webinar title is Terminology Management in Phrase, which you probably know because you registered for it. And we will jump right in it. The usual housekeeping, I'm not going to go into detail. Of course, you're all muted. Please do ask questions. That's always a question that's asked, whether we do them at the end or in the middle. I would say if it fits and it works to answer them right away, we will try that. Otherwise, we'll look at them at the end of the webinar. And of course, there is a recording that will be sent out afterwards. Very briefly, who am I? I'm Klaus at Kaleidoscope. This is my LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn QR code if you want to scan it and follow me. And Vasilis, right over to you.
Thank you, Klaus, and welcome to the webinar as well. My name is Vasilis Moskovos, and I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with Phrase. And today we'll be showing you how the integration works between Phrase TMS and Kaleidoscope, so how you can sync your terms with both systems. So a brief overview of what Phrase is. As you can see, we have some information about our mission, and in Phrase we believe that you need to unlock language. So whenever you unlock language, you unlock opportunity. So it's a way to allow for communication between users and between clients. And as you can see in the following slides as well, if you can go to the next one.
Yep.
Our vision essentially is to focus on AI performed translations and fully automate the workflow using the most powerful AI options available out in the market, and include also machine translation, which has the following, as you can see, impact either on top line or bottom line. Moving on to the TMS factor. So next slide, Klaus. This is the TMS is part of the localization suite. As you can see, the elements here of the entire Phrase suite work in synergy, allowing you to have a fully functional end-to-end localization workflow. So it's a holistic approach. You start from wherever you have your content and go through the entire Phrase suite. This allows you for visibility, centralization, so unification, as well as scalability and automation, which is the heart of the system. And in that system, that's also where Kaleidoscope takes place. So next slide. So Kaleidoscope is talking to one of the elements of Phrase Suite, which is the TMS, the Translation Management System, which allows you for all the previous functionality I mentioned before. So all that centralization of your workflows, and it gives you all the available options for a fully fledged translation management system. So with that said, let's move on to Kaleidoscope and see how we can start the journey.
Yeah, that was super fast. Thank you. You said it was going to be a brief introduction, but that was super brief.
I didn't
I'll
lie.
try. I'll try to top that. So, who is Kaleidoscope? Our claim to fame is taking your content global, and that's what we try to do. We have two big areas where we do business. One is terminology. That is, of course, what we're, I think, most known for. So, on our Kalcium platform, we do terminology management. We have terminology workflow. We can distribute terminology, which is what the Phrase integration is also all about. And we can verify terminology. That means making sure that your authors or whoever creates content, plus the translators, of course, adhere to the correct terminology. We also do business in global content. So we have content creation as a service, content translation as a service. We do a lot of automation of localization workflows. And we also have quite some software and services around quality assurance. So in a nutshell, that's what Kaleidoscope does. I hope I even beat you in time. A short repetition, who am I? I always like to present myself as a terminological entry. So this is me. You can read it maybe afterwards in the slides or in the presentation. I'm CEO and founder of Kaleidoscope, and I'm a terminology aficionado. So don't get me started talking on terminology because that could then take very long. And what is terminology? This is how we at Kaleidoscope define terminology. We believe terminology management has two sides to the same coin or medal, depending on the language. On the one hand side, it is about establishing your wording, correct and effective wording for all the things that matter in your organization. And that can be starting from product names to product components, features, functionalities, but even things like small strings of text that you want to make sure that they are used correctly and consistently, because that's the other side of the same coin or medal. Is we want to, or terminology management wants to enable content creators and any kind of communicators actually to use these terms, names, slogans, part names, whatever they are, to use them correctly and consistently, and of course in all languages. So I guess particularly in this audience, there are a lot of people that come from localization. So here very often it's about correct and consistent use of terminology, but we believe that terminology is also a little bit more than, let's say, quote unquote only for localization. What does this normally look like? If you look at a terminology entry, or a concept as we then call it, we try to achieve this, both of this consistent this consistency and this correctness in the language that we produce. And the way that's normally done in a concept-oriented database, this is a screenshot of ours, which you will see in a minute anyhow. And by the way, all our demo data is always from motorcycles. We're working on getting a demo together that is more around software, because I realize a lot of phrase users come from the software world, but you'll have to live with motorcycles for today. At least it's not completely abstract. So we try to get consistency in the language by collecting all the possible words or terms that people inside a company use for a specific thing. For example, KTM, this motorcycle company, they apparently invented some mechanism to allow you to brake or slow down the motorcycle. I mean, that sounds like a good idea. And they have various different ways of doing that. And one of these is called the single piston brake caliper, but it also has different other names. And the idea of getting it consistent is to also collect these other names for it and label them do not use, or forbidden, or deprecated, or outdated, or avoid this, whatever you want to label it, but make sure the labeling is consistent as well, so that it's clear for the humans on the one hand side, but also for software on the other hand. For example, when you have phrase, so that phrase also understands when this is translated, I should use single piston brake caliper and not one pot brake caliper, although one pot does sound very intriguing, but it's labeled as deprecated here. And you also want to make sure that your content creators / translators use the correct terminology. And in terminology management, that is done by trying to explain the concept itself. So very often this is done with a definition, or images, or videos, or an explanation, or something like that, just to make sure that you actually use these words for the correct thing. This is mainly for the source language, of course. Terminology management obviously is done in all languages. In the target languages, very often we simply assume that the source language is already using the correct term. So it's not that important to actually define the concept, but it is super useful, obviously, for multilingual terminology work, if you understand, what the creator of this thing actually had in mind when they came up with this particular word. If you look into a company and you ask yourself, well, why do they even come up with all these different words? I mean, is this just to make life hard for localizers, or I don't know, to make life hard for themselves? Typically not. Typically this is actually systemic, because terminology, if you look at how things get developed or invented, or how they come into existence. For example, it could be that you have a research and development division that says, it would be really cool if we could build a new form of brake caliper that doesn't need 3 pots but only 1. And then they say, well, we're going to call this thing 1-pot brake caliper. Obviously, that's the only meaningful label that we could assign for this thing. Of course, other people would be like, 1-pot sounds interesting. And then you have an engineer or a software developer who then programs this, develops this, or builds it. And of course they say, wait, if we do this, well, then we only need 1 piston and it has to be a floating caliper. So for them, it's obvious that they're going to call it single piston floating caliper. Product management in turn says, well, but we have the 2-piston brake caliper that's spelled with the number 2. So we should spell the 1 piston with the number 1. And you have tech doc that at some point gets in and starts writing user manuals and stuff, and they say, wait a second, why are you all using different terms? And by the way, I think single piston brake caliper should be used, because floating caliper does not imply it's used for braking, so we should put that in there as well. So you see a lot going on. It doesn't end there. Marketing eventually comes around and says, oh, but on my brochure, single piston brake caliper doesn't sound very sexy. let's call it Power Break XP or something like that. And of course, the question is also, well, what do we do in localization with all of these things? And what this very often leads to is inconsistent language, inconsistent terminology. So if you have a meeting, for example, and we're not even talking about multi-language here, we're just talking a company meeting where this lady explains, oh, our new Power Brake XP, and the other one explodes and says, what? Do you mean the one-pot brake caliper? We agreed upon that 2 years ago or last week. Of course, everybody forgot about it. And the other two are like, what are they even talking about? Is it maybe the one piston brake caliper that they mean? So you see, this can lead to all sorts of confusion already in one language, let alone, of course, in several languages. So if this goes into localization, the poor project manager or translator or whoever she is, she's like, are these things different? Are they the same? If they are different, what's the difference? Do I need only one translation in my target language, or do I need five? So how does this all work? And of course, at the end of the day, it's also the customer who's going, what's the difference between the Power Brake XP and the one-pot brake caliper? And if there isn't a difference, why are they using different terms? So this is why in terminology management, we want to narrow down and nail down this concept and make sure that we use consistent wording, we use it for the correct thing, and then simply how it's done. The problem is, how do you get there? And that's, of course, where technology comes in, but also where processes come in. So typically you need a process, something like, well, you need to start gathering terminology somewhere. It could be localization. That's actually a good place to start, because if a translator doesn't understand a term, chances are that term is hard to understand, because localizers are typically smart people. So if they don't understand it, there sometimes is a reason why they don't understand it. But in my personal view, that's actually a little bit too late. So if content with wrong terminology goes into localization, it could be that it's improved, but it's not a good starting point. So it should maybe start a little bit before that, ideally before content goes into localization. But even more ideally, it should start before content is even written, so that my source content is already correct. And then typically it needs to be validated. So you find all these words in your content, but you need to figure out, is this actually correct? Do we agree on that? You start needing to talk to subject matter experts to get their opinion on it. You need to agree. Some companies nowadays have terminology committees where they sit together and agree on certain wording. That's almost the ideal world. The ideal world would be to do it in our software, and then you don't actually need physical meetings. And of course, you need to make sure that your users also apply and use the terminology. And there's a very recent study that goes very nicely into that direction. I don't know if you've seen it already. I posted a little bit about it in LinkedIn. So CSA Research, most of you probably know them. If you don't, just Google them. They come up with really interesting research in our industry, and they just, I think 2 weeks ago, published the terminology maturity model, so in line with the localization maturity model. And they basically say, well, there's these 5 or 6, including the 0. 0 is not really a stage, it's just you're not doing anything. And I will simply assume that none of you in the audience is at the inactive or ad hoc stadium. Some of you might be in the basic stadium, where what that means, according to CSA, is, well, you have glossaries, you're managing glossaries, but the terminology is not shared really across any department or across LSPs. So if you have more than, let's say, one LSP, or you might even have more than one division that is doing localizations, this is like not harmonized. It's a little bit the Excel area or Google spreadsheet area if you want, but at least you're already collecting it systematically in this basic level. The siloed level, according to CSA, that's when you actually start using real software. So very often this is what you have then in TMSs like Phrase, for example. But of course, Phrase is a localization system, so typically this is done for translation purposes, and it's not really included in the content creation process. And if you have more than one, it's probably not harmonized either. And of course, the goal, if you want to get further on with your terminology in your company, the idea is to go into level 4 from level 3, where terminology is actually agreed upon before it even enters localization, or at least when it enters localization. I know that Phrase is also thinking about that, to do things like terminology extraction before things go into localization, and then trying to see, well, what is new in here. maybe we can harmonize a little bit. But again, I personally think that's actually too late as well, because it should already be correct and consistent when it's actually written and not when it's translated, because I assume somebody will also read the source language. And in this governed phase or governed level, it is also aligned with other corporate activities. So you might have product management on board already, or you might have engineering or the software developers already on board to make sure that the UX strings, for example, that they create also adhere to that terminology. So it's really all about governance. And then there's this ideal level 5, which similar to the localization maturity, this is an ideal world that is probably really hard to reach ever, where terminology is just part of everything that happens in your company. We do have some customers that really go all the way, but similar, as I said, to localization maturity, it's kind of like a nirvana world where who knows if we're actually ever going to end up there. But this is the ultimate goal where we want to come. And that's basically also how we have aligned our software, and I'm coming to the software in a minute. So our terminology management product on the Kalcium platform is called Quickterm. That's Kalcium Quickterm is the product name. And it actually comes in 3 editions. So we have a management edition, which is pretty much geared towards this siloed level. So basically, when you're still there saying, "Oh well, I have it," uh, it's semi-professional. I'm not at the Google spreadsheet or Excel phase anymore, but it's siloed, and I really want to go on and harmonize it and bring it all together and have this a little bit more under control. Our workflow edition goes into the governed area when you say, well, I actually do have people upstream, as I say. So I do have people that are before localization, before the localization step, that are willing to get involved. So you do have, for example, developers or product managers or marketeers or who knows what that are willing to work together to make sure that the terminology is consistent already in the source content that is being produced. And then on the enterprise level, this is really where we integrate into the knowledge management work, where we have comprehensive APIs all over the place and really link together all the systems. As I said, that's a little bit the ideal nirvana to eventually, or to at least strive for. But I would say if you reach the governed level, that's already pretty good, because that means you have terminology that is agreed upon and that is harmonized among the entire company. And that's exactly what we do with our software. So we have components around managing terminology. We have a module that allows you to extract terminology from your existing content, be it documents or web-based things or lists or UI strings or things like that. We can extract the terminology from there. And then what we're really strong on in Quickterm is that we have workflows. So you can say, well, who should actually agree upon a certain word, or who should come up with the target language equivalent of a certain word. You might want to send it to a translator first, maybe to your vendor, so that they come up with a suggestion for this particular term. But then you might want to send it on to your reviewer, so that your reviewer signs off on it and says, yes, this is actually fine, or no, it's not fine. Please give me another suggestion for that. So it's like these workflows that you can have in our system. The second big thing that we do is we provide access. So very often what we also hear is companies coming to us that say, well, we have this super cool terminology database that we use in our localization process, but actually we want the entire company to be able to access it, because again, we want to take that step. It would be even better to have terminology already consistent in the source language. And we want them to collaborate. So if they have a problem with something that we have in there, for example, the reviewer finds something in the term base that they don't agree with, or even in the source language, you might have, I don't know, a product manager or a software developer that has an issue with a certain term. They can provide feedback and they can collaborate with you on the term base. Sorry about that. It's been a long day and it's already 6:20 here in Europe. The next step is verification. So we want to make sure that if you already have the term base, people actually use it and adhere to it. So we have terminology verification, which probably most of you know from the translation context. The difference here is we also do it in the target language, in the source language. So when you have a created English document, or you are in the process of creating an English document, we can already make sure that you are using the correct and the approved terminology. And last but not least, and that's really the focus of today's webinar, is the integration. So we believe that the terminology should be as close as possible to the users. So for a translator working in phrase, that would obviously be in phrase. So that's also what we're going to show you today. How do we actually integrate that into phrase? Which brings me to the last slide before I jump into the demo. You see I'm on 26 of 28 if you speak German. So we have the terminology residing in Quickterm, and what we do is we call that a publication or process, or we say we publish the terminology out to phrase. And the way we do that, or what we enable you to do here, is as a first step, you can filter exactly what you want to publish to phrase. So for example, there might be things in your term base that are completely useless for the translator. So you can say, well, don't even publish those to phrase because we don't need them in phrase. Or it might be that you have, one single big repository in Quickterm, but in phrase you actually want to have 5, 6, 7 term bases, maybe depending on the subject matter or something like that. Then we can filter the content in Quickterm first and only send parts of that over to the term base in phrase. You can also select which fields you want to have there, because you might have, I don't know, 30 fields with metadata in Quickterm, but you only want to have 5 in phrase, simply because it might be overwhelming for the translator to see so much metadata. So you can select exactly what fields you want to send over. And of course, we can match the content to phrase, because phrase has a certain way of storing terminology that could potentially be different from the way you want to store terminology in Quickterm. But of course, we want to send it to phrase in a way that phrase actually understands what we are sending them. And the way it works is obviously over APIs. So it's not an export and then import where you have to download files and stuff, but we do it automatically via the API. That means you can set up a schedule, for example. You can say every Monday morning at 4 a.m. Central European time, whatever. We want everything that has changed in the last week. We want to publish that over to phrase. And then we actually go in. Everything that was changed, we update in phrase. Everything that was added, we create in phrase. And everything that you removed from your term base, if that ever happens, we can delete that from phrase. So that it runs on a complete schedule that you can set weekly, daily, hourly, monthly, whatever you want to do. Or you can run it upon request. So you can also push a button and then that happens. So if you make a super crucial terminology change that you want to be available immediately, you can just push a button and then it's pushed over to phrase. That's actually also what we're going to show in the demo. So we won't wait until tomorrow 4 a.m. That would kind of be a little bit boring for the webinar, but we're going to move it over upon the push of a button, of course. And it also works the other way around. So if I'm a translator working in phrase, and for example, I find a term in there that I think should be in the term base, I can also suggest content from phrase. So what I can do is I can request new terms. I can say, please add this to the term base. I can suggest translations to existing terms. So for example, if something is in English but not in French or whatever you're translating, you can suggest a translation for that, because you just researched it anyhow, I would assume. Or you can give feedback. You can say, I don't actually agree that this should be the preferred terminology in my language, or I don't know, your definition is wrong, or something like that. And that's exactly what we're going to show you as well. So with that, I'm coming over to the demo. The plan we want to do is I want to show you just a little bit what terminology looks like in Quickterm, assuming that not everybody in the audience owns or has seen Quickterm. Then I'm going to publish terminology over to phrase, and then Vasilis is going to show us what that actually looks in phrase, and he's going to send something back to me, to Quickterm, and I'm then going to take back over and process whatever he sends over, make sure it's okay, it's available in my target language, and then send that back again to phrase. So we're really going to show that that whole circle 1.5 times. Yeah, I think that was correct. So let me see how I can switch over to, can I say, oh, I can say display a different screen. That's interesting. I've never tried that before. Is it working? You should see my, yeah, I think it's working. I have the green
Yes,
border
I can
around
see
it.
the screen. Yeah, close.
Yeah. By the way, if anything is unclear or you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the question and answer panel. That should be available. I'm monitoring it. That's why I'm always looking over there a little bit. Well, not a little bit. I have this Star Trek monitor, so it's like way over there. But yeah, coming back to the demo. So this if you want, can be the dashboard to your terminology database. One of the things we really try to do with Quickterm is we try to take the fear out of terminology, because we see that very often in a company, people, when they hear terminology, they are not super excited and go like, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. But they're more like, oh, really? I've been working here for 5 years. Don't come along and send me a terminology database. So we try to say, you know what, terminology is actually interesting. Terminology can actually be fun. So we have things like the entry of the week. Those of you who are European might be following the IATE, the European terminology database, and they came up with these entries of the week, and I found those really cool. So we put that into our platform, and of course you wouldn't post the IATE ones, but you would post some that have to do with you. So for example, here they post, well, what kind of engines do we have and how do they relate to one another? Or to take gamification all the way, you can even run things like term quizzes. So you can post something on your intranet landing page and say, we have a new term quiz, stop by, test your terminology knowledge. And that way you kind of lure people into the term base. Because one of the important things of terminology management is you have to continuously remind people of the fact that it exists. And these are really cool instruments because it allows you to lure them into the term base with something fun and competitive. So you can also set up counters and say, well, who wins this term quiz? Who answers most correct questions in the shortest time? And people really enjoy doing that because they are competitive, they want to learn, and they want to have fun. So we have really good experience from our customer with these term quizzes, which of course you could also do without a platform, but the platform has the advantage you're right there. So if they say like, this is interesting, I'm going to search for this, they can also do that. So for example, I could go in and I could say, I'm going to search for the two-stroke engine. I'm completely ignorant reading that it's actually spelled like this, but I'm going to search for two-stroke engine anyhow. And now I'm actually more into like the terminology look and feel. Let me hide this for a second here. I wanted to hide that by default. So basically what I have here is I have a search result list. So I searched for two-stroke engine, and here are my search results. I have a 100% match. Everybody in the audience knows what that is. So an exact match, two-stroke engine, but it is red and it has this strikeout font. Why? Because we're not allowed to use that. Two-stroke engine is down here. It's actually the one without the hyphen. So this was created by our terminologist, and it's actually rejected. So we shouldn't be using that. Instead, we should be using the two-stroke engine written with the number 2, because that in here is the preferred term. You don't have to do that. We also have customers that say, oh, this is really confusing. We want only the word. People don't understand this colorful hit list. That's fine. You can customize all of that. By the way, you can customize everything in our system, starting from the colors and menu items, the logos. You can even Kaleidoscope. You can remove that if you don't want that on the UI. And for example, also the way we display terminology. So this is a very, let's say, academic way of displaying concept-related terminology. You have the concept data in the beginning, and then you have one language, and then you have one term. Maybe your users are a little bit overwhelmed with this. They're like, hey, I want only the words. You can do that. You can offer them a choice of what we call style sheets. So for example, we have a very simple term check style sheet that just shows what's allowed and what's forbidden. And the rest we assume that they know. But you could also do things in between, like we have this tabular view. That's a little bit like phrase displays it, I would say. In my configuration, I have the definition up front. You don't have to do that. And I have the language here in the first column together with the workflow status of that language. So English, for example, is still in process here. But this is totally configurable. If you want the language at the end or not at all, you can also do that. Yeah, so many different ways you can actually display that, or an end user view like that. We have additional things that go a little bit beyond, let's say, traditional terminology. You already saw the concept maps, so we can also store these relationships between the individual entries. So here, as somebody using this as a translator, for example, I immediately understand, the two-stroke engine is one kind of combustion engine. That's actually interesting. What other engines do we have? And when I click on the combustion engine, it actually jumps up here and says, well, there's 2- and 4-stroke. Okay. And this, of course, is a kind of engine. So if I go up still one level, I can see, okay, well, there are combustion engines. And then Interesting from a linguistic point of view, the electric ones are not called engine, at least not in the UK. They're called motor. I don't know if that's the same in the US actually, or if you would say electrical engine. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the audience knows. But this is also really interesting for translators, because we sometimes have this problem that, how does this actually fit into the bigger picture, and am I actually talking about the right thing or the same thing? So there's a little bit of functionality we have around that as well. But what we want to do now is we want to push this over into phrase. So before I do that, oops, I have the webinar panel is blocking my tabs here. Okay. We are here in phrase in my trial account. Fortunately, it was extended, so we have 27 days. It was going to expire yesterday, I think. Bad idea. So we have a terminology database here, which is actually empty. It has 0 terms, so it's my Kalcium demo, but it has nothing in it. And this is exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm going to push the terminology over there. So for that, I have what we call a publishing task. I have several ones. We can also export it as a PDF, but I don't want to do that right now. As a matter of fact, I want to export it over to phrase. So I'm going to say run this. And then it's running this in the background. And now it's pushing the terminology over. And I also wanted to show you how this is actually configured, assuming that there are some techies in the audience. So this publishing, while it's running, I'm going to briefly show how this is set up. So in our automation tasks, what we configure is, well, we give it a name, so I can easily find it in the list. It's quite obvious. Then we can select which term base. In my demo, and actually very often in real life, there's one term base at the company. Could be that you have several, so you can choose which one to publish. And then we have filtering. So as I said, you don't have to necessarily push the entire Quickterm database to only one phrase term base. You could filter. So I could say, for example, I only want things from business unit equals diagnosis, for example. And then it'll filter the data and only send that. You don't have to do that, but you can. What is quite useful, as a matter of fact, is I can say export only stuff that got modified since the last time I actually ran this export. So this actually makes sense to click on that. Successful is actually an additional step. So here I can say export everything since the previous export. But since we're publishing via API to phrase, we actually know whether it was successful or not, because we would get an error message back from the API. So we can say only if this was successful, then please send the delta. Otherwise, if it was unsuccessful, send it again. So you can't lose anything because something didn't work on a certain day. We can also filter on the language level. We can filter on the term level. So we could say, for example, well, only send terms where, I don't know, the term status or the term type equals, I don't know, full forms. I don't want any abbreviations there, or on the contrary, I only want abbreviations. So you can do all that. I won't do that here. And then I can go one step deeper. I can say, well, which fields do I want to send over to phrase? So I have a lot of fields here, which don't necessarily all make sense or even exist in phrase. So I could say, for example, the search engine optimization data. I don't necessarily really want that in phrase. Or this whole term extraction information here. I don't need that in phrase. I'm going to keep it in Quickterm, but I won't send it over to phrase. And then last but not least, we have the output. So here what we do in the output, we could just store this as a file in a folder or on an SFTP server or in an email as a TBX file, for example. But what we're actually doing is we're pushing it to a what we call term-based connector. So we're actually connecting to an API, which is this one here. And then when I click on connect, it basically looks into that particular tenant that Klaus_2 can access. And it'll say, well, there's a term base here called Kalcium demo. And it'll show me what's actually in that term base. So here, for example, I have 4 languages in there. And for example, German, English, that all maps. But for example, Spanish, I don't have in my Quickterm database, so I'm not going to fill that. And you might see that later in phrase that Spanish is actually not there. And then what I can do is I can map the other fields as well. So for example, in phrase, there's always a domain. We don't have a domain in Quickterm. Well, we could, because our term-based model is completely flexible. So you could call it domain if you want to, but we call it subject field because TBX calls it subject field. And then you can even map the values. So for example, in phrase on the left-hand side, you have phrase. So there actually is a domain called braking systems in my phrase term base. and that maps one-to-one to my value from Quickterm because I set it up that smart way. But it could be that that's not a one-to-one mapping, or it's called differently in Quickterm. Then you can simply map it there. So that's basically how we set it up. And then I don't have it on a schedule, as I said in my demo, but you could say this is a daily schedule that runs, I don't know, Monday through Friday. If you want, you can say every hour and always 4 minutes after the full hour. And then it just runs unattended in the background, and it's always kept up to date. But that's not what we're doing in the demo. And with that, I think, Vasilis, over to you to show what this looks like in phrase. So I'm going to stop sharing.
And can you give me
I,
power of sharing, Klaus, please?
that's a good idea. I should do that. Let me see. This new interface is, as I said, new.
Yes, the interface is quite new for me as well. Since I last did my last working
Yeah,
on
I
GoToWebinar.
can. I'll make you an organizer. I hope that does the trick. There used to be make a presenter. That doesn't exist anymore. Can you present
Far
now?
better now, but I am an organizer. Right. I'm
Okay.
sharing my screen now. So let's move over to
All
phrase.
right.
So I have enlarged the screen so everybody can see it. And this is our term base. It's Kalcium demo. Let's rephrase this. It used to have 0 terms. Now we see about 400 terms. And as you can see, the layout is similar to what is in Kalcium, but it's in a vertical orientation. We have all the languages here. So we have English, German, Japanese, and Spanish. If I squeeze over to Spanish and search for that, I don't think I have anything, as you mentioned, although there is something here. Motomoto
Yeah, it
Silva.
might actually have worked anyhow. So
Right. So as you can see, you can manage the terms here. You can delete them or add a new term if I want to. I can quickly add it there. And going into the term itself, this is the structure of the terminology. So you have the term on top, metadata information, data information about the language, status. We do have new and approved status and also preferred, forbidden. We have match types available here. You can also set up your usage. This is coming through from Calcium. Of course, it's predetermined. We also get the metadata information such as part of speech, gender, number. If there's any note, any short translations can be found here. Term type, all the forms are available here. As you can see, abbreviation. Phrase is not a pun. It's actually a phrase here. And this is where the concept can be also edited. So we do have a domain, subdomains, and if you have some of them active, you can set them to inactive, vice versa. Additional metadata information plus important the term details, when it was created and by whom. So this is quite important to see who's a linguist and who's a terminologist who created this.
mhm.
So this terminology, this term base can be integrated into any project. We already have a demo project here where we have a file and we can see the terms in a term base. This is me opening the file before term base came through, so there is nothing here except on this segment, which now is active since we have about 400 terms, and it's visible by this yellow box and also highlighted yellow. So you can quickly see the term, see what it stands for, and additional metadata information can be found here. So if I click on it, I get to see all the metadata coming from Calcium. So I have the status, usage, everything you saw in the term base is reflected here as well. So all my terms are available, but let's say I'm a subject matter expert. I'm not on bikes. I never rode one in my life, but let's say I am, right? And I found something that it's a potential candidate for a pretty good term, right? So let's say ergonomics. I know it's not for bike industry, but it sounds like a potential candidate. And I'd like to send it over to Calcium for verification from another subject matter expert. To do so, I would have to, first of all, install a small app which connects Phrase TMS with Calcium, and it lives here. So once you install the application, and I'm sorry, I cannot make this a lot larger. I can go full screen. Oh, that's even worse. No. So essentially, this app allows you to connect these two systems. It comes from the Calcium side, so you have to have your user credentials from Calcium to log in. and it's giving you a hotkey option allowing you to select a word within your browser and then use that, pick that up, and then send it over to Calcium as the suggested terms, right? So I have my credentials here, so username and password, and I can set up my hotkeys. I've set it up to Control W. I don't know, probably because I used to be a gamer. So let's say I want to send economics to Calcium. Highlight the word, Control W, and now it opens up my Calcium account. In this demo, of course, my name is Teresa. I'm the user in Calcium, and we already sent the
Congratulations.
suggestion. So it's picking up. So it's picking up the term, and this is my suggestion. I can also add context. I can add a term source if that's available. I can also add more comments. And if I even have attachments and I found, let's say, a lovely image of what ergonomics represents, I can also add it here. Once that's set and I'm good to go, I click on send. And this successfully transmits the information on the Calcium side. So now on the Calcium side, we can start a journey of validating my suggestion, which I'm not sure if it was a good one, but let's see what Klaus has to say. Okay,
See what
so
our subject
let's,
matters have to say. So I take back over.
yes, back to you now. As I
All
said, I'm
right.
not an SME on bikes, right?
And I am. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm logged here still in Calcium, where we left off. And I actually already see that I have a task, so it popped up here. I also got an email, so of course we have email notification behind all the workflows and everything in the system. So what I can do is I can go into my task list. And the way this works, and this is quite unique actually in Quickterm, is everything that we have to do, we put that into a task. Similar actually as you do in a TMS like phrase, where if you have to translate something, you'll get a task or you'll get a job or whatever that particular TMS calls it. We do the same thing. So for example, if Vasilis had suggested 10 new things, I would have 10 in here. Or if, I don't know, somebody requested a change, I could also cheat a change here. So this is useful because we can track the to-dos. I'm also Teresa, so we're all Teresa in this particular demo. She's very popular in our terminology application. And of course, what I can do is I can click on that task. I can say, well, I want to work on this particular task. And I can see already what Vasilis sent over. So he had ergonomics. He said, this is a great candidate. The workflow status was created automatically. Yeah, so it came in. So we automatically assign it new. I can't remember if you typed the comment. No, you didn't.
I didn't add a
So
comment, sorry, no.
yeah,
It
and you
was,
didn't add an attachment either, which is totally
I couldn't
fine.
find an image of ergonomics, so I don't know if you can find one. I'll attach
That's a
it.
hard one, actually.
Yes,
We can
I
also
can.
we can also show that it's not faked, so it's from 6/42/06 today. And basically what I can do now is I am the terminologist. Teresa is our power user, the terminologist. So I can actually open this up. I can say I want to edit that. So for example, I can say, well, this is quite a useless context. I'm sorry. This is a great
It is.
candidate, will not help anybody. Let's just throw this out. I could have actually also just removed that field. And I can now add metadata here that, again, is depending on your configuration. So we are completely flexible in what fields you have available here. There are certain standards. We like TBX. There are other standards that we sometimes recommend to our customers. So it's not really rocket science what you want to have there as metadata, but it is flexible. So for example, what we have here in this example is we have a grammatical gender, we have a note, we have a usage status, things like that. So I might actually say usage status. It automatically suggests preferred, thinking that probably you're mainly going to add preferred terms, but who knows. That's a good thing, actually. I'm going to add a new term. So ergonomics, I could also say what would be a good synonym for ergonomics. Let's say ergonometrics. That actually exists. But we're going to say we don't actually want to use that. So I'm going to add the usage status here. By the way, you can also predefine that the usage status is automatically displayed. So I can say this is actually rejected. We can also create a definition, so where it makes sense. We have tried to integrate AI. So for example, to create a suggested definition, AI makes sense. So we say, you give me a definition. So it says ergonomics involves designing workplaces, blah, blah. I can say I don't like that one, please give me another one. Then it creates a different one, slightly different. The study of is probably not what I want. And so, yeah, the science of this, whatever, I'll just gonna leave that. We can ask our subject matter experts later if that makes sense. And then I can save this. I can say for now I'm good. I could actually also add an image. So we do have that. I don't have access to that field. So we do have you saw that I think in the demo before with the two-stroke engines. I could add that, but good question what an image of ergonomics might be. And then I can save that, so I now see an update. What's important in our system, this is not yet in the term base. This is still a suggestion. This is a term request. We're not yet sure whether we're going to actually incorporate that into the term base or not. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if ergonomics is the right word. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delegate this over to my subject matter experts and say, please discuss. We call this, or in the demo, we call it a discussion task. We're going to say, please discuss which one should be the preferred term. I don't have different workflows configured here. You could have, I don't know, one that sends it over to marketing and the other one sends it to technology and the third one sends it to product management. I don't know. I could assign a deadline if I want, but again, we're not going to wait until Saturday with the demo. I can add a comment. This time I'm going to do it. Please discuss which one we want as preferred. For example, again, I can add an attachment, but I'm just going to send this off for now. And now this went over into a task. I can monitor it here, so I can see has voting happened, yes or no. I can look into the history to see, has anybody done anything with it? No, it was just created, but nothing happened. So I'm going to actually log in now as a different user. I'm going to add in log in as Angela. Angela is our subject matter expert, and Angela should have a task. And in Angela's task list, I now see exactly the same task. Obviously, that's the one I was assigned. So what I can now do is I can read a new comment. I can actually discuss this with my colleagues. Angela actually has a colleague in our demo who's called Angelo. So I can say, Angelo, I think, it should be human design instead of ergonomics. I don't know, whatever. And then Angelo can reply and say, are you crazy? This is totally something else. Let's use ergonomics. So they can discuss here. The nice thing is that gets stored, of course. So in 2 years, if you can't remember what the subject matter experts thought about this, you can go back in and you can see, there was a big discussion whether it should be, what did I say, human design or something like that, or ergonomics. So you don't forget that there was a discussion around that. But of course, what I can also do is I can vote. So I can say, I'm going to add one actually. I'm going to say human design. And this is going to be my favorite. So I vote yes for this. I vote no for the other two. And then I can store this. And I'm going to go back now to be Teresa. And Teresa can see this. So I'm not going to go in as Angelo just to save a little bit of time. But Teresa can track this. She can track what's going on in the discussion. She can track in the preview how far they are. And she can say, you know what, guys, now it's time to end this. Let's finalize this discussion. And then she can say, okay, well, there was no single vote for ergonomics. So probably that should not be the preferred one. Oops, why am I making it preferred then? Probably that should be rejected. And human design, actually, that's the one that got most votes, even though it was added later on. This one should actually be the preferred one. And again, we can add other metadata. We can say, well, this is like you saw in phrase. This is the full form. This is a noun, I think. Term sources, I don't know what, Klaus, something like, or it was Angela actually. And then I could finalize that. And when I'm done at the end, I could, for instance, do other things like send the definition on to some subject matter expert and say, can you please check this? And they would get back to me with a corrected definition or not. When I'm done, I can actually finally create this in the term base. Oh no, we had that when we practiced as well. I remember I did something. I forgot one step. Also in the practice, and that's why it didn't work. So I need to say this is actually an engine clearly, and then I can create it in the term base. Yeah, now it actually works. I can finalize the term request, and that actually sends a message back to who requested it? Well, Vasilis in this particular case. This is now done. Thank you very much for your suggestion. And of course, what I can also do in here, well, to start with, it's now in the term base. So ergo ergonomics is now in the term base, but it's forbidden. It's human design. And of course, for a lot of you, the localization is also interesting. So how can this get localized? There are different ways of doing it. We do, of course, support Excel. So we do have the possibility of simply exporting the whole thing as an Excel file, and then you can import it back in. So if your vendor likes to fill out Excel sheets, you can do that. But the alternative, which we typically recommend, is actually to work within our system. So if I open that up again here, I could also go to my task list. We do have a translation workflow, or we should say research target language equivalent workflow, but that doesn't fit on the button. So we say translation task. And I can say, well, I want this in, I wish I could do all these languages, but I'm going to do only German. That I can actually do. Please be fast. Vasilis is waiting. And then I send this over. And now Taylor is our translator. So I'm going to log in as a third user here. I'm going to log in as Taylor. By the way, if you look very closely, you will see the user interface also looks different. So for example, Teresa had like 6 menu items here. Now I only have 3. Or also if I look into the terminology, you can see that the translator doesn't have as many functionalities as Teresa did. So she can like and watch and send feedback, request a new term, suggest a translation, but there's no create new or edit or something like that, which of course the terminologist did have. And I'm gonna check, okay, what do I have to do? I have to translate human design into German. And again, you can potentially chat if there, I don't know, if you want to ask the reviewer something, you could ask the reviewer, or maybe you have 2 or 3 translators working on this. And what I can also do is I can then provide my translation. And this is quite a complex user interface because it's actually also complex to bring terminology in a different language. But what this actually allows you to do is it allows you to really work on German. So I can now say, for example, well, in English, I have ergonomics, ergonometrics, and human design. Ergonometrics, that doesn't even exist in German, so I'm just going to throw it out. Human design, that I am going to copy simply because maybe it's also called human design in German. But of course, we would make it one word. We make everything one word in German. So it's going to be human design. And I can say, yeah, it's actually also preferred. I could add additional information. So I could go here and I could say that I want to add a note, for example. I could say, okay, I don't have data for the note in English. Because it didn't exist in English. I could say not sure, did not research this, so that the person who's next in the workflow knows, well, maybe I should look at that. And the ergonomics, I can say, well, this is probably ergonomic in German. I'm not sure, and probably it's also rejected. But the point here is that you can be very independent of English. So even if English has 4 terms, potentially you don't need 4 terms in German. Maybe you only need 2, or the other way around. You have only 1 in English, but you need 3 in German. So you can do that. So you don't have to translate this one-to-one, because that's, we think, really complicated and really, hinders your target language terminology work. Again, if you want, you can also export and import Excel files. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want this imported, and now actually this is multilingual. Let me start publishing it over. Export to phrase. I forgot something for the demo. It's going to empty the entire term base again now, sorry. I forget to unselect that option, I think, when I did the mapping. I have it in my script, but I forgot it. So we need to give it a minute. But ergonomics, if I look at that now, I can see, okay, I now have English. I didn't go through any validation process, so it's still new. I didn't send it to approval or so. German also hasn't been finally signed off, so both of these are still in process. But you can see, okay, well, the terms are already there. And with that, I think back over to you, Vasilis, even though it's probably going to take a while for this to show up because I forgot to unselect the clear term-based content before publishing it. So probably it went all the way down to 0 again. But
It's
that's like
picking up
that's
now. It's 162 now. So
all
yeah,
right.
it's
Okay,
picking
cool. So while we're waiting, I can actually show where that is. For there might be some techie people in here. So when I configured the export to phrase, There's an option here in the output that says clear target term base before transferring entries. And I had that on because for the trial, I turned that on. But when we were testing with it, I always wanted to reset it to 0. But of course, in production, you would turn that off because you don't want to delete all the content every time before you repopulate it. You only want to send the delta. So sorry, demo mistake. But I think I will stop sharing so that you can take back over.
Thank you. I have the helm. So let's move over to our terminology. As you can see, it's already growing. 318. I remember it's like 355, 370. Yeah, so
Yeah, it was
370
close
means
to. Mhm.
ergonomics just came in. By the way, I tried to search without the Boolean operator here, the wildcard, and didn't get anything. Yes, 403 keeps going up.
It should be there now.
Yeah,
Ergonomics.
it should be there. And there it is.
There we go. Yeah.
Well, we have our human design preferred term here. It's preferred. And if we switch languages, English,
Yeah, the note was also there, or is there.
note was there. Definition of the concept is there. And let's see that in my editor here. So I'll refresh the page. And there it is. My
Yeah,
ill-advised suggestion of a term became an actual
hmm
term.
cool. Brilliant, very good. So we finished the whole cycle. There is actually a question in the question. I'm not sure. Can you also see the questions, or you want me to read it because it's for you?
I can, let me stop sharing. Let's see if I have a question. Oh yeah, I see questions here. So Frida, what does it do if you choose fuzzy in match type on the term setting?
I think it's for you at least.
So, oh, for
Yep.
me, if it's for on the phrase side, yeah. So if you
Yep.
set it up as a fuzzy match, means that you have a similar term, but there are slight changes. So ergonomics, so like plural, singular, or something like that. It's the same as Apple One, Apple Two, right? So you're not 100% sure that this is the actual term, but you set it as a fuzzy match, which allows you to see, okay, this should not be matched always as a perfect term. So it's a similar match. Did I answer your question, Frida?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
it was also for me because we
Cool.
also have fuzzy matching in the search. We have
Our side
search
is what
settings
it does. So,
where you can say I want to also find fuzziness. So as you explained, for example, if I search for ergonomics and I spell it with a Q instead of a G, then a fuzzy match would also find it. So it basically has the same
yeah.
functionality than fuzzy matching in the translation memory. I see no other questions at the moment. There's sometimes a question like, can I try this? So I'm gonna steal your screen for a second again, and because I
Go
do
ahead.
have well, I have one final slide. So we have 3 different ways to enable you to work with this. We do have a
Oh,
demo,
Klaus,
and the
Klaus,
uh,
before we start, there's another question from Frida
yes,
here.
go ahead. That's fine.
Sorry, that it's rainbow. All right, I guess that's for me. If we use Kalcium to translate terms, do terms only get sent one by one, or can wait? There's more here.
Yeah, I can answer the one about sending the calcium
Oh yeah,
terms. So
go ahead.
So, so basically the way it works normally is that you put that on a schedule. So you say every Monday at 4 a.m. you send everything that has changed over to phrase. So if you have translated 125 terms, 125 will be sent over. Um, a lot of terms I should just use Exceling.
Yeah. So
So you
next,
mean, so
in
you
language.
actually mean into the workflow. I think now I understand the question. So she means into the workflow. We can
Mhm.
also create batches. There are several ways of doing that. For example, we have a feature that's called terminology projects. So let's say you have 50 entries that are all have to do with the same subject matter area or something like that. You can bundle those all into a project, and then you can say send this entire project for translation into whatever Spanish or 10 languages, and then it'll basically batch all those. And you can also track on the project level. You can see, well, from my 50 entries, I have 49 in Spanish, 32 in Portuguese, so I better be putting some pressure on the Portuguese. I probably have 2 in Greece or something like that, so I better bug Vasilis to hurry up. So that's the point of this project functionality. There's also the question about using the app for the new term requests. So yeah, currently that is the only way of doing that. We are in discussions with Phrase to add some more functionality, and one of those would actually be the term request, or actually also the complete by directionality of the workflow, so that translators could just create the term in the Phrase term base, and we would bring that into Quickterm as a suggestion or a new term request or something like that. And then there's a question for you from Dragos.
Right, so if a forbidden term is used in the translation phrase, does it trigger a QA error? Yes, well, thank you for a great presentation. I didn't do much, so thanks for that. Yes, and I can show you the setting if I can hijack the screen from
Yeah,
Klaus.
absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to projects. So this is my editor, and we do have a QA check here. If I run all the checks, and I'm not sure if this is activated, but there is a missing term here. And of course, you can also set it up to pick up different, not just missing terms, but also forbidden terms. So you can edit the QA settings, can be found here. Let's see. So you have missing terms and forbidden terms. So if this is activated and there's something forbidden, you will be seeing that in the QA checks here. Did that cover your question, Dragos?
Yeah, I would have
Um,
understood it that way.
cool. I'll give you back control, Klaus, over the screen. So you can share. Yeah.
No, I think we're good. We're also at the top of the hour. So just
I
one
guess. Yeah,
last
sure.
thing. If you do want to play with QuickTerm, there's an easy way to do that. If you go to demo.kaleidoscope.at, as in beautiful Austria, you can just play around with it. There's actually a documentation you can download directly from the what we call dashboard, from the start screen if you want, that shows you how you can log in and what is configured, etc. We do also offer trials. Trials are free of charge, but they are pre-configured. So there's a pre-configured term base and a pre-configured workflow, but it gives you a good impression of how the system works. And we can also connect that to your Phrase instance. If you want to use your own data and configure your own workflows and test more complex scenarios, we do also offer pilots. Pilots are paid. The services are paid. The software is also free of charge for the pilot, so for all three of those. So go ahead if you like, play around with the demo, and if you want more, then just get in touch with us or also with Phrase. Phrase can also pass you over to us so that we can see what
Absolutely.
we can help you with. All right. No more questions came in, so thanks a lot, Vasilis, for your time for doing this and preparing it.
Thank you,
It went
Klaus,
it went
for.
almost without an error, except for one demo error, but
There is
yeah,
no demo without an error. If it was,
yeah,
if there was an error, there wouldn't be a demo. So
exactly. You can watch a YouTube video. So all right, then. Thank you very much. Good evening to everybody here in Europe, and good rest of the day for everybody in the US time zone. Talk to you soon.
thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, early weekend, I guess.
Bye.
Bye, guys.